My girlfriend's been in a coma for 3 months. But then yesterday I saw her at Walmart. I was passing by the makeup section of the store when I saw my girlfriend Phoebe standing there, picking up a pack of concealer. "Phoebe?" I called out. She looked up at me, and when our eyes met, I was even more sure it was her. I started waving and walking over to her, but instead of waiting for me, she literally dropped everything in her hands and just bolted out the door. I tried to run behind her, but by the time I'd got to the parking lot, she was already gone. I called her phone and got nothing. I decided to immediately get my car and race home, and that's when I became convinced I was going crazy. Phoebe was exactly where I'd left her, unconscious in her bed, with a feeding tube in place and beeping monitors showing her vitals that proved a vegetative state. "Has she moved at all today?" I asked the home care nurse, my voice probably manic. "Sadly, no changes. Today is the same as always." The nurse gave me a concerned look. "Are you feeling all right?" I swallowed dryly and showed her the photo I'd managed to snap while I chased her in the parking lot. It was blurry, but clearly showed Phoebe's face. The nurse studied it carefully. "That's impossible. She hasn't left this bed in 3 months." I sat down beside Phoebe and held her pale hand in mine, still wondering what was going on when I suddenly received a text from Phoebe's old number. "Stop looking for me." I stared at the message in a daze, and then out of nowhere felt the nurse peering over my shoulder to see into my phone. I don't know why, but she instantly started grabbing her things and heading for the door. "I can't do this anymore," she said. "I'm sorry." "Wait, what are you talking about?" I asked. She looked terrified. "Ask yourself why none of the other nurses stayed, why they all quit after one shift." She sprinted out the door and blocked my number. I remember my legs shaking. I was sweating and pinching myself, hoping this was a bad dream. I started going through Phoebe's room, looking for anything that could help me. Jewelry, clothes, sentimental items, but there was literally nothing. Phoebe had no yearbook pictures from school. Her phone had 0 saved contacts except me. It was like she'd cut ties with everyone and just disappeared. She'd told me before she didn't like talking about her past. Apparently, losing your whole family in a house fire does that to you. But there was one thing that didn't make sense about her story. Mrs. Cruz, her sophomore English teacher who'd helped her through tough times. It took 3 days to track down Mrs. Cruz at a retirement community down in Florida, but the moment I did, I drove for 6 hours without a break. I needed answers. When I got there, I pulled out a picture of Phoebe from my wallet and handed it over. Mrs. Cruz held it gently and smiled at me. "Oh yes, I remember this girl clearly. She was my best student, so sweet, despite everything that happened to her." "What do you mean?" I furrowed my brows cautiously. Mrs. Cruz stood up and pulled out an old yearbook from her bookshelf. She flipped to a page, pointing to a picture of 2 girls who looked exactly the same. Penny and Phoebe. "Identical twins," Mrs. Cruz said. "You could never tell them apart until you talked to them." Penny was gentle and loved poetry, and Phoebe was different. Her face grew dark. How different? I tried keeping my voice steady. "You see, Phoebe was institutionalized when she was 14, for trying to burn down their house with the whole family inside." My stomach dropped as I thought about Phoebe's house fire story. If she had lied about that, what else could she be lying about? Mrs. Cruz tapped on the picture I had given her and smiled. "I'm so glad Penny found someone like you." My heart was suddenly about to jump out of my chest. "I'm dating Phoebe, ma'am. This is a picture of Phoebe," I said, expecting her eyes to go wide. Instead, she just shook her head at me. "Sorry, dear, but you're wrong." She pointed at Phoebe's ears in the picture. "See? Phoebe's ear is slightly more attached than Penny's. This is a picture of Penny." I was speechless, and so full of questions at the same time. I pulled out my phone and showed her a picture of the girl I saw in the parking lot. "What about this? Which one is this?" She looked closely at the picture, but before she could answer, the phone in her kitchen rang. She smiled. "Just 1 second." But when she picked it up, her hands started trembling. She quickly hung up and walked straight to her door. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave now, young man." "But what about the picture?" "Please leave." I got up, and she ushered me out with surprising strength. "Check the ears. That's all I can do for you," she whispered, closing the door. My head was still spinning while I raced home. The woman I'd been living with, was she Penny or Phoebe? I sat in my car outside Mrs. Cruz's building and pulled out my phone with shaking hands. I opened my photo gallery and started scrolling through every picture I had of my girlfriend. There were dozens of them. Selfies we took on dates, candid shots I snapped when she wasn't looking, photos from the day she moved in with me. I zoomed in on her ears in each one, my fingers fumbling on the screen. I kept comparing them to the yearbook photo Mrs. Cruz had shown me, the one where she pointed out the difference. Less attached. Penny's ear was less attached than Phoebe's. I checked another photo, then another. Zooming in so close the image got blurry. Every single picture showed the same thing. The woman I'd been dating had an ear that was less attached, just a tiny bit, but now that I knew what to look for, I could see it clearly. My stomach felt sick as the truth settled in. The woman lying in my bed right now, the one I'd been caring for with a feeding tube and monitors, that was Penny, which meant the person who ran from me in the store parking lot, the one sending me threatening texts from the old phone number, that was Phoebe, the dangerous twin, the one who tried to burn down her family's house. I sat there for a minute just staring at my phone screen, trying to process what this meant. Had I ever actually dated Phoebe at all? Or was it always Penny pretending to be her sister from the very start? When did the switch happen? If there even was a switch? My brain felt like it was going to explode from all the questions. I started the car and pulled onto the highway, heading back home. It was already getting dark, and I had a 6-hour drive ahead of me. I barely stopped except for gas and a bathroom break at a rest area around midnight. My mind wouldn't shut up the whole time. I kept thinking about our first date at that bookstore, how shy she seemed, how she loved poetry. Mrs. Cruz said Penny was gentle and loved poetry. So maybe it was always Penny, but then why did she tell me her name was Phoebe? Why use her sister's identity? And where was the real Phoebe all this time? I gripped the steering wheel tighter as I drove through the empty night roads. The headlights of passing cars felt too bright. My eyes were getting tired, but I couldn't stop now. I needed to get home and see her, see Penny, and try to figure out what to do next. By the time I pulled into my apartment parking lot, it was 3 in the morning. I walked up the stairs slowly, my legs feeling like concrete. I unlocked the door as quietly as I could and stepped inside. The apartment was dark except for the soft glow from the monitors in the bedroom. I stood in the doorway and just watched her for a while. Penny was lying there exactly where I'd left her, breathing through her feeding tube. The machines beeped softly, showing her heart rate and oxygen levels. She looked so peaceful and innocent. Her face relaxed in sleep that wasn't really sleep. Nothing about her seemed like someone who would lie about their whole identity, but she had. Or maybe she had reasons I didn't understand yet. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to the old number. I know you're Phoebe. I know she's Penny. We need to talk, somewhere public, just to understand what happened. My thumb hung over the send button for a second. Part of me didn't expect any response. Part of me hoped there wouldn't be one. But I pressed send anyway because I needed to try. I couldn't sleep after that. When morning came, I was still sitting in the kitchen chair, exhausted but too wired to rest. I went back into the bedroom and took out my phone again. This time, I carefully photographed Penny's ear from multiple angles, making sure the lighting was good and the images were clear. Then I scrolled back through all our old selfies from before the accident, the ones where we were smiling and happy. I saved several of them to a separate album. The ear shape matched perfectly in every single one. This was definitely Penny in my bed, and it had been Penny all along. My phone rang and I jumped. It was the home care agency. I answered, and the woman on the other end sounded uncomfortable. She told me they couldn't send anyone else after what happened with the last nurse. All their available nurses had either quit or refused the assignment. She said I would need to find a different agency, but honestly, she recommended I get a doctor to oversee the case first, because something seemed off about the whole situation. I thanked her and hung up, feeling more alone than ever. I opened my laptop and started searching for neurologists in the area. I needed someone who knew about coma patients and long-term care. After reading through a bunch of reviews, I found Dr. Kavya Sharma. She had good ratings, and her profile said she had lots of experience with patients in vegetative states. I called her office and explained the situation as briefly as I could. The receptionist said, Dr. Sharma could see me in 2 days for a consultation about taking over Penny's care. I booked the appointment immediately. My phone buzzed with a text notification. My hands went cold as I saw it was from the old number. Do not involve others. This is between us. You don't understand what you're doing. I read it 3 times, my stomach turning over. The message felt like a threat, but also like a warning, like Phoebe was trying to protect something, or maybe protect herself. Either way, it just made me more sure that I needed help. I couldn't handle this alone anymore. I took a screenshot of the message before it could disappear. Then I opened a new folder on my laptop and labeled it Evidence. I dragged the screenshot into it, along with all the photos I'd taken of Penny's ears and the old selfies showing the match. I added the blurry photo from the store parking lot, too. I typed up a quick document with timestamps of everything that had happened. The nurse quitting, the texts, the visit to Mrs. Cruz, finding out about the twins. If this situation got worse, if Phoebe escalated or tried something dangerous, I wanted everything documented and ready to show someone. I picked up my phone and dialed the non-emergency police line, my fingers still shaking a bit from everything. The operator answered after 3 rings, and I explained the situation as clearly as I could. A woman who looked exactly like my girlfriend was stalking me and sending threatening texts. The girlfriend in question was currently in a coma in my apartment. I know it sounded crazy, but I had proof. The operator stayed calm and professional, taking down all my information and the details about the texts and the store incident. She said someone from the detective unit would follow up within 48 hours to review my report. and evidence. 48 hours felt like forever when someone was watching me, but at least it was something official now. I thanked her and hung up, then immediately pulled up the contact list from the home care agency. They had sent 5 different nurses over the past 3 months before they all quit. I started calling each number, leaving voicemails that probably sounded desperate. I explained who I was and that I was trying to understand what happened, what scared them away, anything that could help me figure this out. Most of the calls went straight to voicemail. One number was disconnected. I was about to give up when my phone rang back. It was one of the nurses, but she didn't say hello. Her voice came through quiet and rushed, like she was hiding somewhere. She said she couldn't talk long and she was sorry, but it wasn't safe. Before I could ask what she meant, the line went dead. I tried calling back, but it went to voicemail. That message alone made my skin crawl worse than anything else so far. I opened my laptop and started searching everything I could find about adolescent psychiatric facilities in the area from 15 years ago. Mrs. Cruz had mentioned Phoebe was institutionalized at 14, which would have been around 2009 or 2010, based on the yearbook date. Most of the records were sealed or required authorization I didn't have. I spent hours clicking through old news articles, facility websites, anything that might give me a lead. My eyes were burning from staring at the screen when I finally found something. A small mention in a local paper about a facility called Riverside Youth Center that had closed 5 years ago. The article listed former staff members, and one name jumped out at me. Eloise Shelby, a counselor who had worked there for 20 years before retiring. I found her current phone number through a public records search and saved it to my contacts. It was too late to call tonight, so I decided to wait until morning. I closed the laptop and rubbed my eyes, feeling the weight of exhaustion hitting me all at once. The next morning, I called Eloise Shelby right after I checked on Penny and made sure her feeding pump was working properly. Eloise answered on the 4th ring, her voice older but steady. I explained who I was and that I was trying to find information about someone who had been at Riverside years ago. She went quiet for a moment, then asked me the name. When I said Phoebe, she let out a long breath. She remembered her clearly, she said, but this wasn't something she could discuss over the phone without knowing more about why I was asking. I told her the whole story as briefly as I could. The twins, the confusion, the stalking, everything. Eloise listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said she needed to check some things before she could talk to me properly. She would call me back in 2 days after she looked through her old notes and made sure she wasn't breaking any laws by sharing information. 2 days felt like another eternity, but her tone made it clear this was the best I was going to get. I agreed, and she hung up, leaving me with more questions than answers. That evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table trying to eat something when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from the old number, but this time, it had a photo attachment. My stomach dropped as I opened it. The image showed my apartment building taken from across the street. I could see my living room window on the 3rd floor, the blinds partially open, the lamp I had left on visible inside. Someone had been standing right there watching my home, close enough to take a clear photo. The message had no words, just the picture. I jumped up from the table and ran to the living room window, yanking the blinds shut so hard I nearly pulled the whole thing off the wall. Then I went to every other window in the apartment, closing blinds and curtains until the place felt like a cave. I checked every window lock twice, testing them with my hands to make sure they were secure. My heart was pounding, so hard I could feel it in my throat. Phoebe wasn't just texting me anymore. She was right outside, watching, waiting. The idea of her standing there in the dark, staring up at my window, made me feel sick. I barely slept that night, jumping at every small sound from the hallway or the street below. As soon as the hardware store opened the next morning, I was there waiting at the door. I grabbed a cart and started loading it with everything I could think of. Motion sensor lights for outside my apartment door, a video doorbell camera with a good quality feed, extra deadbolts and chain locks. The cashier rang everything up without comment, though I caught her glancing at me a couple times like she was trying to figure out if I was paranoid or in actual danger. I didn't care what she thought. I paid with my card and hauled everything back to my car, then drove straight home. The installation took most of the afternoon, but my hands felt steadier now that I was doing something concrete, instead of just waiting around for the next scary text. I mounted the motion lights on either side of my door frame, installed the video doorbell, and synced it to my phone, then added the extra locks to the door itself. When I was done, I stood back and looked at my reinforced entrance. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. I sat down at my laptop and composed an email to my building management. I kept it vague but clear enough that they would take it seriously. I explained that I was experiencing harassment from someone who had been near the building, and I would appreciate it if they could keep an eye out for anyone suspicious or anyone trying to access the building without proper authorization. I attached a photo of Phoebe from the parking lot, noting that this person should not be allowed inside under any circumstances. I hit send and hoped they would actually read it and not just file it away. The appointment with Dr. Sharma was scheduled for the next morning, and I spent the rest of the evening gathering every piece of medical documentation I had for Penny. The records from the ER when she first collapsed, the care plans from the previous agency, notes from the nurses who had briefly worked with her. I put everything in a folder and set it by the door so I wouldn't forget it. Dr. Sharma's office was in a medical building near the hospital, and I arrived 10 minutes early with my folder of records. The receptionist checked me in, and I sat in the waiting room trying not to bounce my leg too much. When they called my name, I followed a nurse back to an exam room where Dr. Sharma was waiting. She was probably in her 50s with kind eyes and a calm manner that immediately put me at ease. I handed over all the records and explained the situation while she reviewed them. She asked questions about Penny's current care routine, her feeding schedule, her vital signs, how long she had been in this state. Then she asked if she could examine Penny directly, and I realized I should have arranged for her to come to the apartment instead. Dr. Sharma said that was fine, and we scheduled a home visit for that afternoon. She wanted to see Penny in her current environment and assess her condition properly before making any recommendations. When Dr. Sharma arrived at my apartment that afternoon, she spent almost an hour examining Penny thoroughly. She checked her reflexes, her pupils, her muscle tone, listened to her heart and lungs. She reviewed the feeding tube placement and the monitor readings, taking notes on a tablet the whole time. When she was done, she sat down with me in the living room and went over her findings. She confirmed that Penny was in a vegetative state, showing no signs of consciousness or awareness. The care I had been providing was adequate for basic maintenance, but this level of long-term care really required more than one person could manage at home. Penny needed professional monitoring, physical therapy to prevent muscle deterioration, proper medical oversight. Dr. Sharma was gentle but firm about it. Then she brought up something I hadn't fully considered. We needed to verify Penny's identity officially through medical records or distinguishing marks, because right now everything was based on what I had been told and what I had assumed. If there really were twins, and there really had been some kind of switch, we needed concrete proof of who this patient actually was. I pulled out my phone and showed Dr. Sharma the photos I'd taken comparing the ears. She studied them carefully and nodded. She asked if there were any scars or other marks that might help identify which twin this was, since identical twins share the same DNA and standard tests wouldn't work. I tried to remember everything Mrs. Cruz had mentioned about the twins. Then it hit me. Mrs. Cruz had said something about Penny having surgery when she was younger, an appendectomy. Dr. Sharma's eyes lit up, and she immediately asked if she could check. We went back to the bedroom where Penny lay motionless. Dr. Sharma gently lifted the hospital gown and examined Penny's lower right side. There it was, a small, faded surgical scar about 2 inches long on her abdomen. Dr. Sharma took several photos with her medical tablet and made detailed notes about the location and appearance of the scar. She explained this was strong evidence for confirming identity, though getting dental records or other medical history would help make it official. She agreed to take over as Penny's supervising physician and said she'd start the paperwork that afternoon. I felt relief wash over me, having someone medical finally believe me and take charge. After Dr. Sharma left, I went through Penny's old wallet that I'd kept in a drawer. There was a card for a dentist's office across town. I called them right away and explained I needed to request dental records for a patient. The receptionist put me on hold for several minutes. When she came back, her voice sounded apologetic. She told me their records had been destroyed in a fire 5 years ago, and they had no backup copies from that time period. Another dead end. It felt too convenient, too suspicious. Everything connected to these twins seemed to involve fires and missing records. That evening, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I answered and heard a woman's nervous voice. It was Eloise Shelby, the counselor from the facility where Phoebe had been institutionalized. She'd checked some things like she promised. She confirmed Phoebe was sent there after trying to burn down the family home with everyone inside when she was 14. But then Eloise's voice dropped lower, and she said something that made my skin crawl. Someone had called the facility asking who had been inquiring about Phoebe's records. Someone knew I was digging into this. My hands started shaking as I realized Phoebe was somehow tracking my investigation. Eloise quickly added that she remembered Penny had an appendectomy scar, the same one Dr. Sharma had just found. Before I could ask anything else, Eloise said she couldn't talk anymore, and the line went dead. I sat there staring at my phone, trying to process how Phoebe knew what I was doing. Was she watching me? Had she somehow tapped my phone? I got up and checked all the windows again, making sure the curtains were closed tight. I spent the next hour organizing everything into my evidence folder on my laptop. Photos of the ears, screenshots of the threatening texts, Dr. Sharma's documentation of the scar, notes from my conversation with Mrs. Cruz, timeline of events. I was adding Eloise's information when my phone buzzed with a new text from that old number. The message made my blood run cold. It said I could think scars made me safe, but I should leave this alone. Phoebe was clearly monitoring everything I did, every step I took to figure this out. She knew about the scar discovery somehow. I immediately forwarded the new text along with everything else to the police report number they'd given me. This time I got an actual response. A detective named Clyde Nolan called me back within an hour. His voice sounded professional and interested, not dismissive like the first operator. He said he'd reviewed what I sent and wanted to come by in the morning to go over everything in person. I agreed and gave him my address. Detective Nolan showed up at 9 the next morning carrying a notepad and wearing plain clothes. I let him in and spread everything out on my kitchen table. The photos comparing the ears, printouts of all the texts with timestamps, the parking lot photo from the store, Dr. Sharma's medical documentation, my timeline of events, the doorbell camera footage. Detective Nolan spent almost an hour going through it all, asking questions and taking notes. He told me he'd seen cases like this before, twins with complicated histories where one becomes obsessed with the other. He took my statement seriously and said the threatening messages combined with the photo of my building were concerning. He explained that stalking and harassment were actual crimes we could pursue, but we needed more evidence to get a restraining order approved. The texts alone might not be enough since they came from an unregistered number. He suggested I document every single contact from now on. He also said I should consider a safety plan in case Phoebe escalated her behavior. That meant having a bag packed, knowing my exits, maybe staying somewhere else for a few nights. He gave me his direct number and told me to call immediately if anything else happened. After he left, I felt both relieved that someone official was taking this seriously and more scared knowing it was bad enough to need a safety plan. I knocked on my neighbor's door around 10 that night. Chloe answered in her scrubs, probably just getting home from her shift at the hospital. I explained the whole situation as quickly as I could. The twins, the stalking, the texts, everything. She listened without interrupting, and when I asked if she'd be willing to act as a witness if anything happened, she agreed right away. She gave me her number and told me to call any time, day or night, if I saw anything weird or felt unsafe. Having someone nearby who knew what was going on made me feel a little less alone in this mess. The next morning, Detective Nolan called with an idea. He suggested I try to set up a meeting with Phoebe somewhere very public with lots of people around. If she showed up and made any threats or acted unstable, we'd have witnesses, and it might be enough to get a restraining order approved. It felt risky, but I was tired of hiding and waiting for her next move. I opened my phone and pulled up that old number, the one that kept sending me threats. My fingers shook a little as I typed out the message. I told her I'd meet her at the coffee shop on Main Street tomorrow at 11 in the morning, just to talk. No police involved. That last part was a lie, but I needed her to actually show up. The response came back within 2 minutes. It just said I had to come alone, and that she'd know if I brought anyone with me. I screenshot the message and immediately called Nolan to tell him. We worked out a plan where he'd park in an unmarked car across the street with a clear view of the coffee shop windows. Chloe agreed to sit inside with a book, so there'd be a witness right there if anything went wrong. I barely slept that night. I kept playing out different versions of the conversation in my head, trying to figure out what I'd even say to someone who might have been pretending to be her own sister for months or years. What do you ask someone like that? How do you even start that kind of conversation? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Phoebe's face in that parking lot, the way she'd looked at me before running. I must have checked my phone 50 times hoping for another message that might give me some clue about what she wanted. Morning finally came, and I got to the coffee shop 15 minutes early. My heart was beating, so hard I could feel it in my throat. Chloe was already there, sitting by the window with a thick paperback, and when I glanced across the street, I could see Nolan's car parked with a view of the entrance. I ordered a coffee I didn't really want, and sat down at a table where I could watch the door. 11 o'clock came and went. Then it was 11:15, 11:30. I kept checking my phone, but there were no new messages. By 11:45, I was starting to think she wasn't coming at all, that this whole thing was just another way to mess with me. Then my phone buzzed with a new photo. It showed me sitting in the window of the coffee shop, taken from somewhere across the street. I looked up fast, scanning the area outside. That's when I saw someone in a dark hoodie getting into a car about half a block down. I jumped up and ran for the door, but by the time I got outside, they were already pulling away. I couldn't even see the license plate from where I stood. I walked back inside feeling defeated and sat down hard in my chair. Chloe came over a minute later and quietly told me she'd managed to write down the make and model of the car. Plus, she got 3 numbers from the plate before it turned the corner. It wasn't much, but it was something. I called Nolan right away, and he came into the coffee shop to get Chloe's information. He said he'd run the partial plate through the system, but warned me that without more numbers, it probably wouldn't be enough to identify the specific vehicle. There were likely dozens of cars that matched that description with those 3 numbers somewhere in the sequence. Another dead end, another frustration, but at least we had one more piece of evidence that Phoebe was actively watching and following me. That afternoon, I was back at my apartment trying to figure out my next move when Dr. Sharma called. Her voice was professional but concerned as she explained that given everything going on with the safety issues and the fact that I couldn't provide 24-hour monitoring, I should really think about moving Penny to a proper long-term care facility. The words hit me hard even though I knew she was right. I'd been Penny's only caregiver for 3 months now, sleeping in shifts, managing her feeding tube, watching her monitors, and it was taking everything I had. Adding a stalker situation on top of that made it basically impossible to keep her safe at home. I hung up with Dr. Sharma and just sat there staring at the wall for a while. Moving Penny to a care facility made total sense, but it also made me feel like garbage. I'd been taking care of her for 3 months now, doing everything myself, and the idea of handing her off to strangers felt wrong, even though I knew it was the right choice. I looked over at her lying there with the feeding tube and monitors, so still and quiet, and my chest got tight. But then I thought about Phoebe watching my apartment, about that photo she sent of my window, and I knew I couldn't keep Penny safe here anymore. I grabbed my phone and searched for the hospital social worker Dr. Sharma had mentioned. Her name was Annika Roberts, and she answered on the second ring. I explained the whole situation as quickly as I could, about Penny being in a vegetative state and needing long-term care. Annika listened carefully and asked a bunch of questions about Penny's condition and current setup. Then she dropped the bomb. I didn't have legal authority to make medical decisions for Penny. We weren't married. She had no advance directive naming me, and without that, I couldn't actually authorize her transfer to a facility. My hands started sweating as I realized how stuck I was. Annika must have heard the panic in my voice because she started explaining the guardianship process in a calm, steady way. I'd need to file a petition with the court, showing that Penny needed a guardian and that I was the right person for the job. It meant getting affidavits from Dr. Sharma and maybe other people, proving my relationship with Penny and showing she couldn't make decisions for herself. The whole thing sounded overwhelming and complicated, but Annika said she'd help me through it step by step. She promised to email me some basic information and forms to get started. I thanked her and hung up, feeling like my head was spinning with legal terms I barely understood. That evening, I was heating up some leftovers when my phone buzzed with a text from the old number. I almost didn't want to look at it, but I forced myself to check. The message said something that made my blood go cold. It mentioned the rain and the broken umbrella from our first date. That was a specific detail, something private that only Penny would know about. The text asked why I was trying to take her away, and the way it was worded made it sound like Penny herself was texting me. I read it 3 more times, trying to make sense of it. Was Phoebe somehow accessing Penny's memories? Had they talked before the accident and Penny told her sister about our dates? Or was this proof that Phoebe had been pretending to be Penny even back then? I sat down at the kitchen table with the phone in my hand and just stared at that message for probably 20 minutes. The weight of it pressed down on me hard. Whether Phoebe had been pretending to be Penny or they'd somehow switched places at some point, there were real moments between us that actually happened and actually mattered. That first date with the broken umbrella was real. The conversations we had were real. Someone loved me, even if I didn't know for sure which twin it was. I set the phone down and tried to think through everything logically. The next morning, I made coffee and pulled out my laptop. I started going through our entire relationship from the beginning, writing down dates and events, trying to figure out when things might have changed. We met at a bookstore 6 months ago when she asked me to reach a book on a high shelf. We started dating after that, going out for coffee and dinners, talking for hours about everything and nothing. 4 months into dating, she moved in with me because her apartment lease was ending, and we were spending all our time together anyway. Everything seemed normal and happy. Then 2 months after she moved in, she collapsed suddenly one morning while making breakfast. I called 911, and the ambulance rushed her to the ER. The doctors said it was a brain hemorrhage that she might not wake up. They asked for her ID to process the admission, and I gave them her wallet. I never thought to check which name was on the ID, because why would I? She was my girlfriend. Of course, the ID would match who she said she was, but now I wondered if that ID said Phoebe or Penny. I picked up my phone and called the ER records department. A woman answered, and I explained I needed copies of the admission records from 3 months ago, specifically what identification was used. She said she'd process the request, but it would take 5 to 7 business days to get the records together and mailed out. I thanked her and hung up, frustrated by how slow everything moved, but knowing there was nothing I could do to speed it up. Later that afternoon, Annika emailed me the guardianship petition forms, along with detailed instructions. I printed everything out and started reading through the legal language that made my eyes glaze over. The forms asked for affidavits from Dr. Sharma, confirming Penny's condition, and from other people who could verify my relationship with her and my ability to be a guardian. I'd need to prove I was suitable, and that Penny needed someone to make decisions for her. I sat at the kitchen table filling out forms, writing down dates and details about Penny's care, when my phone buzzed with an alert from the new doorbell camera. I pulled up the app and watched the live feed. Someone in dark clothes was walking up to my door. My heart started pounding as I jumped up and ran to look through the peephole. But by the time I got there, whoever it was had already left. I opened the door carefully and looked around the hallway. Empty. I checked the camera footage again and watched the person approach the door, reach towards something near the frame, then turn and walk away quickly. Their face was hidden by a hood the whole time. Footage and timestamps showed it happened around 2 in the morning while I was asleep. I saved the clip to my laptop and added it to my evidence folder. Then I pulled up my phone and blocked that old number without even thinking twice about it. I opened my email and forwarded every single threatening text message to Detective Nolan, with a note explaining what just happened with the doorbell camera. Setting those boundaries felt really good, even though I knew it might make Phoebe even more mad at me. The next morning, I was making coffee when I heard something hit my front door. I ran over and found a big yellow envelope from the hospital records department sitting on my doormat. My hands were shaking, so bad I could barely tear it open. Inside were copies of all the admission papers from 3 months ago, when my girlfriend collapsed. I flipped through the pages fast, looking for the ID information section. Right there on the patient intake form, it listed the name as Phoebe, but in the notes section, someone wrote that no government ID was shown, just verbal identification given by the patient. So whoever was brought into that ER told them her name was Phoebe, but never actually proved it with a driver's license or anything official. That meant either Penny was pretending to be Phoebe when she got admitted, or maybe Phoebe brought Penny in and gave her own name to the hospital staff. Either way, the whole identity mix-up started right there in the emergency room, and nobody caught it because they looked exactly the same. I sat down at my kitchen table and read through every page twice, taking notes on anything that seemed important. Later that afternoon, Dr. Sharma called and said she finished writing up the medical statement for my guardianship petition. She noted the scar from Penny's surgery and wrote her professional opinion that the patient in my care was most likely Penny, based on all the evidence we had. I drove over to her office to pick up the signed papers, and she put everything in a sealed envelope for the court. On my way home, I stopped at Chloe's apartment and asked if she could write down what she saw with all the stalking stuff. She sat at her computer right then and typed up a 2-page statement about the doorbell footage she helped me review and the weird feeling she got when she saw someone watching my building. I thanked her about 10 times and promised to buy her dinner once this was all over. Back at my apartment, I spread everything out on my table and started putting together my petition packet. I included Dr. Sharma's medical papers, Chloe's witness statement, printed copies of all the doorbell camera footage, and the report numbers from every time I talked to Detective Nolan. The stack of papers was really thick by the time I finished organizing it all. I drove to the courthouse the next morning and filed my emergency guardianship petition with the clerk. She looked through all my evidence and seemed pretty surprised by how much documentation I had. She told me the judge would review it within a few days, and I should expect a call about the hearing date. 3 days later, the courthouse called and said they scheduled a quick hearing for exactly 1 week away because of the safety concerns I mentioned in my petition. The clerk explained that I needed to be ready to answer questions from the judge about why I should be Penny's guardian and how I would take care of her. I spent that whole week practicing what I would say, writing down answers to questions I thought the judge might ask, and going over my evidence pile about 50 times to make sure I knew every detail. 2 days before the hearing was supposed to happen, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. The message said she would meet me one time with no police, or she would disappear forever, and I deserved to understand what really happened. I knew right away it was Phoebe, because nobody else would write something like that. My first thought was to ignore it, but then I realized this might be my only chance to hear her side of things and maybe figure out the truth. I called Detective Nolan right away and read him the text. He was quiet for a minute, and then said I could meet her, but only in a very public place during the daytime with Chloe somewhere nearby where Phoebe couldn't see her. Nolan said he would park in the area too, but stay out of sight, so Phoebe wouldn't know he was there. We picked a big park in the middle of town that always had lots of people walking around, especially at lunchtime. I texted back the location and said noon tomorrow, and Phoebe replied with just one word, which was okay. I barely slept that night thinking about what I would say to her and what she might tell me. The next morning, I got to the park about 20 minutes early and found a picnic table near the main path where everyone could see us. I spotted Chloe sitting on a bench about 50 yards away with a book in her hands, pretending to read, but really keeping an eye on everything. My heart was beating, so fast I thought it might jump out of my chest while I waited. Right at noon exactly, I saw someone walking toward me across the grass. She sat down on the other side of the picnic table and looked right at me. I leaned forward a little bit to get a better look at her ear, and there it was, slightly more attached to her head than Penny's ear in all those photos, exactly like Mrs. Cruz had told me to check for. This was definitely Phoebe sitting across from me, not Penny. She started talking before I could say anything, her words coming out fast and broken like she'd been holding them in for years. She told me about the fire when they were kids, how their older brother actually started it, but she got blamed because she was already the problem child. The institution took her at 14 and kept her there until she was 18, and the whole time Penny visited and felt guilty about everything. When Phoebe got out, she had nothing, no records, no credit, nothing, because Penny had been using her name to get into college and build a normal life while Phoebe was locked up. She said Penny felt so bad that she let Phoebe use her identity sometimes, like they were sharing it, but then Penny got serious with me, and Phoebe felt pushed out of her own life. When Penny collapsed with the brain thing, Phoebe saw it as a chance to finally be herself again, but she was too scared of hospitals and authorities to come forward the right way because institutions messed her up so bad. I listened to all of it while watching her hands and body language for any sign she might try something, but she just sat there crying and explaining. I told her I got that it was complicated and unfair what happened to her, but I couldn't have someone following me and sending threats, and I needed to protect Penny no matter what. She nodded and wiped her eyes and said she would stop everything if I promised Penny would get real professional care and not just be stuck in my apartment. I agreed, and she stood up and walked away across the park. I waited 5 minutes, then called Nolan right away and told him everything that happened. He said the conversation plus all my other evidence was enough to get a no-contact order if she broke her promise, which gave me legal protection going forward. The guardianship hearing happened 2 days later and went smooth because I had so much documentation. The judge looked through all my evidence and medical reports and granted me temporary guardianship just for medical decisions, which was exactly what I needed to arrange proper long-term care. Sharma helped me transfer Penny to a secured facility that specializes in vegetative state patients, where she has professional monitoring all day and I can visit whenever I want. Nolan filed his full report with the prosecutor's office, and they noted that harassment charges could still be filed if Phoebe contacted me again. I spent a weekend packing up the apartment and keeping only what I actually needed, and I started seeing a therapist to work through everything, the lying, the fear, the weird feelings I had about both twins. 3 weeks after that parking lot encounter at the store, I visited Penny at her new facility and sat next to her bed holding her hand. I decided to stop trying to figure out every detail about Phoebe and just focus on making sure Penny gets good care while documenting anything if Phoebe shows up again. It's not a perfect ending because I still don't know the complete truth about their past or which twin I actually dated for those months, but I have boundaries now, and Penny is safe, and I'm learning to be okay with not knowing everything. The therapist says that's actually healthy, accepting that some stories don't wrap up neat and clean. I hold Penny's hand and tell her I'll keep visiting, that she's safe now, and that whatever happened between her and Phoebe, I'm going to make sure she's cared for with respect. And that's the story and the takeaway all in one. I love turning real experiences into something we can actually learn from. If even one part helped you out, that's a win for me. Subscribe so you'll catch the next one when it drops.